Harold Jones was born on the 11th of January 1906 in Acquitted, a small town in the South Wales Valley. Harold hailed from a low-income family. His father was a coal miner who earned hardly enough to get by, and his mother was a stay-at-home housewife who looked after 4 children, Harold being the eldest of the bunch. At 14 years of age, Harold left school to seek work to supplement his family's income, soon finding employment at a local store on the high street called Mortimer's. Here, he gained a reputation for being a trustworthy employee who was adored by customers. To the outside world, Harold Jones was a respectable young man, but deep beneath the surface, a sinister character was lurking. On the morning of the 5th of February 1921, a local girl named Frida Burnell was sent on an errand by her father to Mortimer's store, the workplace of Harold Jones. She had been tasked with purchasing grit to feed her family's livestock, and the walk to the store was only supposed to take a few minutes, but over an hour would pass by, and Frida had failed to return home. Growing concerned, her parents walked to the store themselves to inquire about whether Frida had arrived there, and it would be Harold Jones who confirmed that the little girl had indeed visited at 9:05 a.m. He claimed that she had made her purchases and then left. Frida's parents scoured the area for their missing daughter, but when she had not turned up by 3 p.m, they reported her missing to the police. A large-scale search ensued, but sadly, the next morning, Frida's brutalised body was found stuffed inside a sack in an alleyway, just 300 yards from the store. A coroner would rule that her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. A cord was still present around her neck. Frida's arms and legs had been bound tightly, and she had been sexually assaulted. Investigators would later uncover a handkerchief belonging to Frida, laying on the ground inside a shed owned by Harold's employer, nearby to where her body had been found. Aside from Harold's employers, Harold was the only person who held a key to this shed. As news of the child's murder spread throughout the town, a witness would come forward, claiming to have heard screams coming from the direction of the shed on the day that Frida was killed. As police turned their attention to the teenage boy at the store, he denied having even entered the shed that day. Nonetheless, Harold was arrested and held at Acquitted police station on suspicion of murder. When the inquest began on the 7th of March, Harold took to the stands, providing a testimony that only gave conflicting accounts, uncovering his lies about various aspects of his day. Despite suspicions against him, there was no concrete evidence in the case that tied Harold to the murder. Harold was again remanded in custody until the following month, with bail being denied whilst he awaited trial. On the 21st of June, the trial began. Harold pleaded not guilty, stating that the final time he had seen the victim was when she left the store. His employer, Herbert Henry Mortimer, also provided him a solid alibi, that Harold had been working at the store with his son that day, and that the two had gone on an errand to deliver potatoes to a customer at 10 a.m. Further solidifying his innocence was Harold's father Philip, who told the court that his son had returned straight home from work and remained at the family residence, so did not have time to dump the victim's body in the alleyway. His mother also stressed that Harold had always been respectful and courteous around young girls. It would take 5 hours for the jury to reach a verdict of not guilty. In response, Harold stood on top of a table to address his new supporters. "I thank you all. I do not hold a grudge against the people of Acquitted for the horrendous ordeal I have been put through." What followed was an emotional reunion amongst Harold and his parents, who whisked him to a restaurant to celebrate. As he left the courthouse, he was greeted with cheers in the streets from the public who had lined the streets with bunting. Many found it incomprehensible that a 15-year-old boy had even been considered responsible for the rape and murder of a little girl. In response to Harold's acquittal, the town rallied around to purchase a gold pocket watch for him, and his neighbour, George Little, would welcome him upon his return home with the words, "Well done, lad, we knew you didn't do it." Just 17 days later, George's own daughter would become Harold's next victim. On the 8th of July, Harold was alone at his family home when he sighted 11-year-old Florence Little on the street playing hopscotch. With the familiar urge raging inside him, Harold approached Florence, luring her into his home on the pretense of helping him with an errand. Once inside, Florence was at the mercy of the older boy, who proceeded to strangle her in the kitchen before beating her about the head with a piece of wood. In a final brutal act, Harold dragged Florence to the sink and cut her throat with a pocket knife. He had just committed his second murder. After hiding Florence's body in the attic, he returned to the kitchen to wash away the blood from the sink and floor before bathing himself. When Florence never came home that night, her parents reported her missing just after 11 p.m. With this being the second major case in a matter of weeks and the suspect from Frida's murder still at large, police immediately got to work, conducting house-to-house searches. The town, who was still reeling from Frida's death, was already on high alert. Hundreds of volunteers aided in the search for Florence, with Harold himself even helping. The following evening, police conducted a search of Harold's home, with their attention being drawn to the attic door, which appeared to have blood smears on it. Upon entering, the lifeless body of the missing girl was discovered alongside the blood-stained knife, a saucepan filled with the child's blood, and a large and bloodied plank of wood. After being informed of the discovery inside his home, Harold's father tracked down his son who had slipped away unnoticed and performed a citizen's arrest on him. After being dragged back to the family residence, Harold was arrested on the charge of murder. When news that Harold had been arrested a second time for murder spread through the town, a crowd of 500 furious locals headed to the police station to demand the boy's release. The incident forced an officer to address the irate crowd, stating, "I have found the body of the child in the attic of Harold Jones, foully murdered, and I have arrested Harold Jones. I think this is all I can tell you, and it would help us if you disperse and go to your homes." While awaiting trial, Harold Jones made a full confession to having murdered Florence Little, explaining that he had a desire to kill. The trial took place on the 1st of November 1921, with the prosecution contending that Harold had greatly enjoyed the public attention from his first trial just weeks earlier in the death of Frida Bonnell, and part of his motivation for killing Florence Little was to duplicate this same reaction from the public. This time, Harold's trial lasted just 1 hour. After reading a statement in court that confessed his guilt, Harold was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, only being spared capital punishment on account of him being under the age of 16. Harold's former employer, who had provided a false alibi at his first trial, later closed up his shop and moved away after facing much backlash from locals. If he had not provided the false testimony, then Harold would likely have been found guilty of Frida's murder and would not have been released to kill again. It is unknown what became of the Mortimer family after they left town. In December of 1941, Harold Jones was released against the wishes of his psychiatrist. He was 35 years old. In the years that followed, he joined the British Army before later relocating to London under the alias Harry Stevens. Here, he married and went on to have a child. His family were unlikely to have ever known about his murderous past. Between 1964 and 1965, a series of unsolved murders would take place in Hammersmith, West London. In recent years, numerous investigators have shared their belief that Harold Jones was in fact the culprit, though he was never officially considered a suspect. Harold's young victims were buried at Brennethal Cemetery, where over the decades their resting places fell into a poor state. In 2017, An appeal by local author Neil Milkins helped to raise over £4,000, and the graves of both girls were restored to their former glory. In January of 1971, Harold Jones would die from bone cancer. He was 64 years old.